Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Beatles and their US albums, their American discography, a discography that many criticize as being made up of, well, predominantly compilation albums. And that's one of the questions I want you to consider tonight as we go through tonight's video. When is it possible? Can an artist put out a compilation effort, in other words, an album that is different than their original intent, and it still wind up canon worthy? All right, so in tonight's video, we're going to cover two of the offerings on the screen behind me. I'll cover the third offering in my very next video, but central to both videos will be the release of the brand new Beatles offering here in 2024. Of course, that's their new box set that contains every Beatle album released in the United States in 1964, either by Capitol or by United Artists. Now, in my last video, I offered some criticisms of this release. I'll leave a link to that in the corner for you and as an option at the end of this video. But one thing I didn't bring up a whole lot, folks, was what was the asking price for this brand new box set. At $300, basically you get 7 albums. One album, The Beatles Story, nobody was asking for. I talk about that in that video as well. So basically you're getting 6 albums for that price, and each one of those 6 albums will be available for about $30, a full 120 bucks under the asking price for the box. However, if you're a Beatles completist and you've got the extra bucks, of course, it's a great and attractive product. I can understand being tempted to get this box. And with 6 of those albums available to buy separately, I'm interested in at least a couple of those albums myself. Which gets me to the whole point of the video tonight, folks. How important is canon, and what is canon? When we talk about an artist's canon, we're talking about what almost everybody accepts as their offering as a unit or as an artist. Most Beatle fans would probably agree the 13 British versions of their albums are canon. Everything else kind of stands to the side. And when you think about what was the Beatles' intent as artists, as the core company around them, what they wanted to offer, you can't argue with that. To me, the 13 albums by the Beatles are definitely their hardcore canon. But is that true for everybody? You know, in 1963, the Beatles were a country conquering unit. In 1964, when they arrived here in the United States, they became world conquerors at that point, and whose discography represents more people, and would that be something that we would take into consideration as to discussing what is an artist's true canon? You see, folks, I'm a first-generation Beatle fan, all right? I bought these albums we're talking about first time around, right? Just got back into vinyl, and guess what? I'm still auctioning for these as they come around. Now, even though I don't see these as their true hardcore canon offerings, that doesn't mean that I don't see the mindset of a general fan who grew up with these and doesn't want to be bothered with different track listings after decades of listening to their favorite band with certain songs on certain albums and the rotation being exactly as what these albums have to offer. You see, on one hand, you can define canon through artist intent, and that's how I do it. But you can also define canon by the fans, the listeners, the buyers' recognition of what the Beatles had to offer. In America, it was those albums that we grew up with. Now, for some of us, as soon as we heard there were British versions and that the sound was superior, and by the way, these original British versions are still being hailed as the superior sound, even compared to this new box set and its improved sound. In other words, new and improved, but still inferior to the original offerings. A little bit from this album, a little bit from that album, or we'll grab that single and attach it, and voila, we'll call it whatever, Beatles 65. In fact, last year's offering, a newly remixed and extended and remastered Red and Blue albums, are exactly that. They are the perfect example of what a compilation album is. As a matter of fact, those albums were given to us through Alan Klein, of all people, one of the biggest villains in rock and roll. For those of you not aware, he was temporarily the Beatles manager, and he told them he'd make them money, and those compilation albums, the Red and the Blue, along with this album even before them, the Beatles' Hey Jude album. As a matter of fact, it's the Hey Jude album and the album for my next video coming up, Magical Mystery Tour. All right, these two albums are my very favorite of the compilation albums offered to us by the Beatles. I hate Alan Klein. I didn't like anything he stood for, but these offerings at least justify his existence on the Beatle team at the time that he came up with these offerings. But why is this my favorite and the Red and the Blue albums don't even get on that list? Well, I'll tell you, it has to do with the timing of release. You see, the Red and the Blue albums were released in 1973. The Beatles were broke up by that time for 3 full years. But when Hey Jude came out, it was still in 1970. We had just got Abbey Road by the Beatles, and Let It Be had not yet been released. This was just another Beatle offering here in the United States for us, and we got another new Beatle album after it. That's why I see this album as canon. That's why I want this album to be remixed, remastered, and extended. I know a lot of the material that they even considered for this album wound up on other projects. But because of its being so firmly attached to the Beatles were still the Beatles. Now, privately they weren't. John had already asked for a divorce, but while this was out, the Beatles were still officially a band, right up to December 31st, 1970, when Paul McCartney finally took the Beatles to court and dissolved the partnership. Folks, Hey Jude is a Beatle album. Now, unlike Magical Mystery Tour, this brainchild, like I said, came from Alan Klein. He asked for a list of Beatle tracks that hadn't appeared on US albums. So the idea was to target the US market right from the start. He wanted singles that hadn't appeared on US albums, as well as their B-sides and any leftover tracks from the British versions America hadn't used. Once he had that list and made his choice on what would be included on this album, he still didn't use every single track on that list. And so when they were getting ready to price this album, they were wondering if they should, because it's a short album, folks, it's about 30 minutes, right? They were wondering whether they should charge full price for the album. Early versions indicated that that's exactly what they were going to do. At this time, full charge was $6.99. Those albums, a few of them actually got out there, are always indicated with an O as a prefix, and that meant full price. But then they reverted to the fact that, hey, this is a compilation album, let's give them a break, and it was sold for $5.99. Now think about this. This album is about 30 minutes long, right? And we got a price break, $1, and but think about what could have been left on this album for an even better value. I was looking at this article in UCR, Ultimate Classic Rock, and I wanted to read just this short paragraph. It says here, still, even in their attempts to rectify this oversight, the label erred. 3 of the earliest Beatles songs that hadn't appeared on a Capitol album, There's a Place, From Me to You, and Misery, were omitted, as were a couple of B-sides. For example, I'm Down and The Inner Light. They also included on the list the German version of She Loves You, Schliebdig. But dig what they say here. With Hey Jude's running time at a little more than 32 minutes, there was no reason to exclude these 6 songs, which totaled 13 minutes. And then the article goes on to say that the music was mixed and presented up to the usual Beatles high standards, and that wasn't always the case with American albums. But by this time, a lot of inequities had been solved across the pond. Now, another reason I consider this album to be canon is think about its timing and the photographs that are on this album. You know, there's 3 of them, and the 3 photographs were taken on the very last photo session that the Beatles ever had. On the front cover, we get one of those photographs with a superimposed tiny photograph above the Beatles' heads of the Beatles elsewhere on the ground. On the back cover, the Beatles even look cooler, many fans saying the back cover should have been the front cover, and indeed there was consideration for that. To me, although the back cover, the Beatles do look cooler, I love the front cover, I love the stonework, I love the overall color blend of that photo better. I think it was a wise decision to go ahead and choose the cover they did. It just has a better color scheme in general. With all of this in consideration, I can't help but feel that Hey Jude is true Beatles canon. What do you guys think? Is it just another compilation album, or because of its placement between 2 official Beatle releases and its release time while the Beatles were still officially the Beatles, give it any extra validity? I want to hear from you guys in the comments on that. Let me know what you think of this album. Did you ever own it? And when you owned it, did you play it often? I bought this album the second it came out, and I played its grooves off of it. I've replaced it so many times over the years, it just ain't funny, folks. Oh, and by the way, I concur with Bruce Cologne from B-Sides when he says that he loved the Red and Blue albums because of the way each song flowed from track to track. And I agreed with him. That was one thing that particular offering had going for it. But I've got to tell you, folks, the Hey Jude album as a single LP, as it was presented to us, was just as good. It sounds so wonderful track to track. And here's my final proposal. If it is indeed canon, or at least canon enough compared to, say, the new box set, why can't we get a properly extended, newly remixed, newly remastered Hey Jude. All right, folks, that's the video for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please, I always say this, give me a thumbs up. That helps the YouTube algorithm identify the channel to a larger audience. The video winds up in a whole lot more feeds that way, folks. That's how it works. I hope you enjoyed the video tonight. It's just my opinion. You know, I call the channel The Bottom Line, and that only means it's the bottom line the way I see it. But the channel is also structured to hear your comments, and I want to hear from you tonight. Because you know what, folks? Here it comes. In the comments, that's where we prove we are the tribe.